Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the love of Jesus and who is actually doing that in the world today. When you love someone, you're going to read what they wrote, listen to what they say, and you're going to follow them and you're going to respect them. Now, there's two major world religions in the world today, Christianity and Islam, who supposedly respect and revere Jesus. Now, if we're talking about love, let's find out who loves him more in physical appearance, in acts of worship, and in doing what he said. First, let's start with physical appearance. Just recently, in the last month or so, we had in the West Christmas. So we had lawn ornaments in our yards of statues of Jesus, of the baby Jesus, of Joseph, of Mary. And when we went to church, we saw on the walls, plastered around, pictures of Jesus, Mary, other prophets, and also statues. And that some people would carry big statues of Jesus and put them in places in different churches. Some of them do, some of them don't. Now, if we look at the characteristics, the way he looks like in these settings, he usually has a beard, not the baby Jesus, but when you actually see Jesus as a big Jesus, he has a beard. And so, Jesus has a big beard, he has a flowing robe, simple robe, and this is the same as when you look at Joseph, his supposed father in Christianity, and Mary. She's wearing, covering clothes that cover her body, simple clothes. She's covering her hair, her face. She's modestly dressed, a respected woman. Now, if we compare that and we look around the world today and see who in general is following that more, whether it's the Christians or the Muslims, we can see that it's the Muslims who are doing that. In the simple fact that in the West here, if you're outside any time of the year, whether it's summer, fall, winter, if you see an Islamic couple walking down the street, a Muslim man and a Muslim woman in general, you'll see that the man may have a beard, and they're both dressed relatively simply. And in some of the, for sure in the metropolitan area, you'll find that there'll be many men outside who are actually wearing robes. Sometimes these big white robes and big beards, and they look exactly like what we see in the churches or in the lawn ornaments. And the same with the woman when she's covered and covering her face and her whole body. Now, in some circumstances in the West, you do see a man with a beard, though usually it's not for the sake of following Jesus or any other prophet for that matter, or showing love to him. And sometimes you see some nuns, some of the Catholic order, women who cover themselves, or some Mennonites, some very minor sects in the whole of Christianity, who cover themselves as Mary did. For the most part, though, you only see this in a large percent in the whole world with Muslims. So just in physical traits, we're following the Muslims. Now some people might say, okay, well, maybe not all the prophets had beards, maybe they shaved. If we look in the Old Testament, in Psalm 133, verse 2, it speaks about Aaron's beard, when David was singing about this, about Aaron's beard, and that his beard went down to the end of his garments. So I mean, this must have been a very large beard. Now we're going to go on and talk about worship. If you love someone, you can dress like them if you want. It's not a major thing, but in worship, if you worship like someone or you follow what they're saying or they're doing, this is something more so than even looking like them, because you're doing what they did. So now let's look first at a couple of verses in the New Testament. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, it says that Jesus said, "I come not to destroy the law or the prophets, but to fulfill. And if one jot or one title of the law, it shall not be removed until the end comes. Anyone who takes the least of the commandments and takes it away and teaches it to others, he shall be the least in the kingdom of heaven. The one who teaches the law as it is, he will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." So basically what he's telling his disciples and the others around him is that the law of Moses shall be there, and it's not going to go away. He's saying that there's a law and that the people have to follow it. Some people say that, okay, well, we have a law, but because, as Paul said, because of the law, I sin. Because of sin, I have to pay the price of death or going to the hellfire. So, the law is dead to me. He's going to say, okay, well, Jesus forgave my sin. That's the end of it. James, another disciple of Jesus, I think he was on the right path, he said that in chapter 2 of his letter, verse 17, faith without works is useless, is empty. Because anyone can say, oh yeah, I believe, man, I believe. It's in my heart. I don't have to do anything because I know I believe. If you actually do something, you're proving it to yourself and others, but you don't really need to prove it to others, that you're actually capable of worshiping. Because if you have faith in your heart, it should be in your limbs. You should be doing it. You should be in society acting good. Now, going on to things of worship and what Jesus and other prophets used to do, in Exodus chapter 40, verses 31 and 32, speaking about the washing before prayer, Aaron and Moses both washed before they prayed. And in the world now, the only group that's really doing this in a whole are the Muslims. And before every prayer they wash. They wash their hands and their arms to the elbows. They wash their face, they wipe their head, and they also wash their feet before they approach or before they meet their Lord in prayer, as did Aaron and Moses, both of them following the Torah in the Old Testament, which is exactly what Jesus would have followed. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 39, it says Jesus fell on his face when he prayed. And in multiple places in the Old Testament, this occurs. And who are the ones in the world today who, in general, every time they pray, they fall on their face and worship their God? These are Muslims, when they fall into prostration. Anyone can see this in any of the prayers they do 5 times a day. If we look around the world today, and we see, who are fasting. We heard that Jesus fasted in the wilderness in Matthew chapter 4, verse 2, that Jesus fasted for 40 days, and also 40 nights. But anyway, he fasted for a long period of time. Now, Muslims fast for 1 entire month of a lunar year, and that's in the holy month of Ramadan, from the morning until the night when they break their fast. Now, Jesus did this, and the Muslims do this, and they continue to do this, and they've been doing it for 1400 years as an act of worship to God, and as love of following the prophets, and a love of God, because God instructed the prophets to do these things. In the Bible, in Psalm 84, it interestingly speaks about the valley of Becca. Now, in the Quran, the valley of Becca is also mentioned, and it is known historically that Becca is actually modern-day Mecca, Saudi Arabia. Now, it says at the end of that psalm that the valley of Becca, or those who go to the valley of Becca, are blessed. So, God is actually blessing the people who go there. Now, historically, as far as I can remember, the Christians and even the Jews used to go to that place. And nowadays, it's almost exclusively only Muslims who go there. So, the ones who are receiving the blessing from the Lord, as spoken about in Psalm 84, are actually the Muslims. So we're doing what the prophets used to do, and we're still doing it today. These are some ways which we show love of Jesus and what he taught and what he preached. So we just talked about physical appearance and acts of worship. Let's see what the greatest commandment was and what Jesus said. If really we're going to love him, we should at least follow the greatest thing he said. Now, in Matthew chapter 22, verse 36, Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your strength and with all your mind." This is the greatest commandment. And the second commandment is to love your neighbor like yourself, to treat others as you want to be treated. Now, this is going back to Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 4, and in other places in that chapter, as well as what Jesus said in the New Testament, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord." Now, an explanation to these two things is look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, with the 10 Commandments. God says in the Old Testament, "I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make an idol, whether it is in the heaven above, in the earth beneath, or in the sea below. You shall not bow down to them, and you shall not worship them." So, if we look at this, who are the ones who are worshiping only one God, who do not erect any idols, or any pictures, or anything like that when they pray? These are the Muslims. If you go to any mosque and look around what's inside the mosque, it'll just be a simple room where people stand up and they pray. There's nothing in the front as an idol. There's no pictures on the walls of other prophets that we supposedly worship, because we love what the prophets came with. We love God, and we love what God gave to the prophets, in that we know that there's only one God worthy of worship, and that's God in heaven, as was commanded by all the prophets, and as was said by Jesus, being the main commandment. Jesus never said anywhere in the Bible, anywhere, unambiguously, that he is God, or that people should worship him. But always, he prayed to God, and he worshipped God. He fasted for God's sake. He didn't fast for his own sake. He didn't pray for his own sake. He did these acts in veneration and worship of God who's in heaven. So, we need to try and do that in our lives every single day. And for the most part, this is what Muslims do. And we do not worship someone like Jesus, because he didn't tell us to worship him. He told us to worship God.